I was written up at the beginning of every single school year
Mm,
because instead of me jumping into the curriculum right from day one, I spent the first week culture building, ethos building, and
yeah,
expectations building in
yeah.
collaboration with the students. You're not keeping up with your colleagues who are starting off with the curriculum like, but how am I going to design lessons that are culture responsive,
Mhm,
inclusive, and support investment of learning or
mhm.
ownership of learning if I don't know who's in the room?
So today we have the gift of thinking through with someone who has been sitting with many of the questions that I find myself holding lately. Ken, I am so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, this is wonderful. And before we dive in, I want to name some of what I've been wondering about with you to start us off.
Perfect. Please.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about what it means to teach right now as myself, as the teachers that I support, and I find myself wondering, what does it feel like for teachers right now? What do they need? What do they hope for? How do we design learning spaces that meet teachers where they are, that honor their experience and their incredible expertise and respond to their concerns and hopes around AI? Ken, as you sit with teachers and educational leaders in your work and all that you do, what are you hearing? What feels most present for teachers right now?
I mean, there's quite a myriad of things. I think we can go to the psychological and then the practical. So, the
Uh-huh.
psychological component is similar to the introduction of a variety of technologies, I would say, like this century. So, it's the whole idea around, am I behind? Comparing myself to others, comparing, what I do to what they do. And it creates this almost this conflict of, I can't keep up, but I'm not keeping up.
Mm.
And the thing I always refer to in my trainings is a thing called the SCARF model, which is a psychological model developed by Dr. David Rock, which SCARF is an acronym for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness.
Hmm.
And so, in many cases, educators across many roles and responsibilities, if you take the SCARF model,
Mhm.
it's like a Likert scale. It's either threat or reward. And so they
Mm.
see AI as a threat to their status. They see AI as a threat to the certainty of the instructional programs that they run or what they do. They see AI as a threat to their autonomy on what they do. And in many
Mm.
cases, some of the marketing points really push on that nerve.
Mm-hmm.
If they haven't been provided the right degree of relevant and responsive professional development,
Mm-hmm.
then their relatedness becomes a threat. So that's the psychological part, and maybe in our conversation we can address at least some of that. Now, the teaching or the practice part
Mm-hmm.
is, how do I use it in ways that
Mm-hmm.
allow me to do what I need to do more efficiently?
Mm-hmm.
And then that becomes almost the equivalent of a fork in the road, which is why I always pose the question, if you
Yeah.
had to prioritize one or the other, which one is more important, efficiency or efficacy? And it's
Mm.
not a coincidence that the primary marketing talking points of several, actually quite a few platforms, is also educators' two biggest pain points. The
Mm.
primary marketing points are save your time and make you more productive.
Yeah. They
And
they
that's why
all
I always say, like, at what
totally.
expense though?
Yeah. I want to drop one thing is one of the conversations that I had with a tech software developer was this: we just want to make learning fun again. And we want to help
Okay,
and we
keep
want to
going.
have, yeah. And so, yeah. And that was the tagline. It was how to make it more enjoyable. And that we've got this platform that's going to automate a lot of the things that teachers don't want to do that creates the burnout. And yeah.
Those are awfully lofty, and I would always use the word myopic slash arrogant assertions.
Hmm.
Like, here's an example. So,
Hmm.
in that context,
Yeah.
I would say, okay, so what you're saying is that if we don't look at it from an instructional design and resource allocation perspective, that it's not possible to make learning fun outside the context of artificial intelligence then. And I would not only would I counter that, I have pretty much a whole career of receipts to back it. So that's number one.
Yeah.
But I will say I don't disagree with that overall disposition is and it's something that I bring up all the time is, what does it look like to design learning in the context of play?
Mm.
And I have a list of design conditions that include things like it has to be spontaneous, there has to be degrees of creativity, there has to be degrees of agency, that it doesn't prioritize task-oriented things. I've got a pretty
Yeah.
much a whole career of receipts around that. But then also, before I would go to AI, my question would be twofold with that. So, number one, what are the tasks that exist for educators that can compromise their well being? A lot of it is clerical. And there is
Mhm.
research papers that have been peer reviewed and published that, if I remember correctly, the recent one I saw was on average, 70% of a teacher's time on the job is doing clerical things.
Mhm.
And so for me, it's, well, what happens if you offload those clerical things? Now you regain some of that time, but then now what are educators supported in doing with that time that they've regained? But
Yeah.
then the other thing is the whole idea around the burnout. I mean, that assumes that
Yeah.
those things are the burnout where, again, I'm no longer in the classroom, but I will say for our recording that stuff, while it was a pain point, my burnout was because of the toxicity of the environments that I worked in.
Yeah, that's
It
it.
had,
It
it
had
had nothing to
nothing
do
it
with
had
me having to
nothing to
do
do
grading.
it had
Nope.
nothing to do with grading, it had nothing to do with lesson planning, it had nothing to
Nope.
do with these things that we're bombarded to accept
Correct.
as the automating. And I love lesson planning. I don't care if it takes me at night, like I enjoy it. I
Hmm.
love the back and forth. I love the visualization. I talked to my husband about this of it's movies in my mind that I'm
Yep.
creating of this learning environment.
Yes.
And I love it. I don't want that taken away from me, from that experience of it.
But if you're spending time in the evening lesson planning because the time that you have allocated during the day is being used for something that is not essential to the functions of what
Hmm.
you're doing, yes, that is going to
Yeah.
lead you towards,
Yes.
at a minimum, demoralization. And so
Hmm.
for me, again, that response overlooks the potentially harmful components of the environments
Hmm.
that a teacher is working in. If
Hmm.
I have a prep period, is my prep period being set up for me
Completely.
to do my lesson plan design, to collaborate with other teachers?
Yeah.
AI, while AI can do lesson plan design, there's a reason why there was a research paper published this past April
Hmm.
that talked about the bias in pedagogical lesson plan design in AI
Mm.
platforms. AI is not going to know your learners. Do you know your learners? And are you being supported in doing that? Right.
Yeah, yeah.
But now I'm going to connect it to the burnout thing.
Please do.
For a number of years, pretty much my last 7 years in the classroom, I was written up at the beginning of every single school year
Mm,
because instead of me jumping into the curriculum right from day one, I spent the first week culture building, ethos building, and
yeah,
expectations building in
yeah.
collaboration with the students.
But that
Like,
takes
in
away
other
from
words,
that takes away from the content, Ken.
that was one of the things. You're not keeping up with your colleagues who are starting off with the curriculum. Like, but how am I going to design lessons that are culturally responsive,
Mm-hmm.
inclusive, and support investment of learning or
Mm-hmm.
ownership of learning if I don't know who's in the room?
Yeah.
They should know me too,
Mm-hmm.
because that's part of that ethos building. There's a reason why I did it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, even in that context, AI can't do that for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so, the whole idea is that you even had that situation where I tell people that is another one of many of the examples I have with as far as my classroom career of me getting in good trouble. It was
Yeah.
worth getting in trouble for that.
Good trouble.
The administrators that never bothered to say,
Yeah.
wait a minute, you keep doing this. Why are you doing this? It was,
Yeah.
you're not being compliant with what we want,
You're not
and we want to
conforming.
control you. So
Yeah.
therefore, we're going to take a punitive step towards doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But my whole point is that AI can't do that. And those are the things that you think about that could lead to the toxicity of a workplace environment
Mm-hmm.
that can lead to things like burnout. You see, so those are some of the things that I would get into long before I go to
Mm-hmm.
how AI can solve it. Well, we need to address burnout. Yes, I get that part. But do you know what the causes of that burnout are?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm thinking of how do teachers even wrestle with the external pressure to adopt AI? I mean, it's intense. I mean, you're probably seeing this urgency and a lot of it
Mhm.
is hyped up
It is.
by, the tech industry of get it in, get it in, get it in. There's
Correct.
already you're not doing PBL, you're not doing project-based learning. Oh, you're
Correct.
behind. Oh, you're not doing whatever it is, this latest thing, or you're not using this tool. Oh, you're behind. Or you're not whatever. It's constant in the
It's
world.
noise, though.
It's
It's all
noise.
noise.
Yeah.
It's all noise. Oh, and this is where media literacy comes in because I
Mhm.
always ask educators, to your point, when you're hearing those talking points, who are they coming from? Are they coming from your colleagues at your school, or are they coming from external forces that have a financial interest in that sense of urgency? When has a sense of urgency actually served us well when it comes to education? I always say the history of public education is a history of education reform. There's
Mm,
always a problem, and there's always going to be either an actual or a manufactured problem, because ultimately that sense of urgency usually catalyzes the expenditure of financial resources. So don't fall victim to those talking points. Where are you now? Where
yes.
do you see opportunities for growth? And now, how do I support that process?
Let's go back to the psychology of it.
Mhm.
That first part of what teachers are holding, how are they navigating, just the emotions, the tensions, all of that within.
Yeah, I mean, my main thing is to first directly address that. And
Yeah.
that is to try to develop protective measures to not fall victim to the marketing points and the recycled talking points.
Mm-hmm.
We've been down this road before, whether it be AI now, it was Web 2.0, a
Yeah.
number of years ago. Before that, it was Wikipedia. Before that, it
Mm-hmm.
was Google. And before that, it was actually computers.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been down this road before. And my whole thing is one is giving yourself the grace to recognize that you are where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have opportunities for growth, how will you take ownership of your learning to embrace that opportunity? If you look to your left and look to your right and you want to compare yourself to, your colleagues or the person who's near you, then my first question to you is what's leading you down that path and how do we
Mm,
directly address that?
yeah. Yeah.
So that's the psychological part. The other part is to recognize how fast technology can move and that realistically it is not possible nor is it necessary to try to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first step, is to address those psychological, self-induced psychological barriers or threats, if you will, to your well-being. Then we can get into, the pedagogical skill sets and functional skills around, now that I recognize that and I give myself the grace to grow with that. Now, what are the useful skill sets that I currently have, and where are the opportunities for growth? Or essentially, what is my starting point around
Yeah.
this? And,
Yeah.
my thing with that is, again, if you look at historical context, strong pedagogical foundations really don't change.
Mm,
How we implement them has evolved, especially because of technology. And artificial intelligence is just the latest
yeah.
disruptive iteration of
Mm-hmm.
technology being available to the masses that we want to be able to appropriately scrutinize, analyze, and then synthesize into contextual meaning for us, just like you just shared. Let's take a look at how might artificial intelligence be a part
Mm-hmm.
of you, the educator, not this technology that you
Mm-hmm.
are somehow ineffective or incapable because you can't keep up.
Okay, so now we're in the implementation stage. Where do you begin?
Well, you got to start by grounding yourselves and grounding what we do. So I'll give you a specific example around that. You hear the term AI literacy used often. And I always ask the question, I always pose the following. So number one, I always ask, if you've heard AI literacy, did the person who's using that term define it? And unfortunately,
Mm,
almost all the time, the answer is no.
mm-hmm.
And I go, okay, so if we're using a term ubiquitously and the assumption that everyone knows it, that's two problems. One, that is a bias called the curse of knowledge. Okay.
Mm,
Because it's being used so prevalently, there's an assumption everyone knows what it means, and clearly they don't. But then
mm-hmm.
number two, part of that grounding and into the practical side is we need to go through the process of developing your own definition of AI literacy in your context. And so one of the things I do is I use a Freire model and I talk about what is the purpose, what is the function, what does it look like in action, and what is the key terminology in it. And
Mm-hmm.
your definition should fit your context. So, in other words, if I'm defining AI literacy, a third grade instructor's definition should not be the same as an 11th grade science teacher's definition. There's a completely different context. So let's ground it in that. Let's
Yes.
ground it in recognizing how does your definition essentially blend into your
Yeah.
overall definition of literacy, because otherwise what happens, you run the risk of debasing literacy. You have so many carve outs that
Uh-huh.
the core way you define literacy essentially becomes obsolete. And that's why I say it runs the risk of turning into a mindless platitude. So that's one example is let's
Mhm.
talk about how you even define it, because how you define it
Brilliant.
will frame what you prioritize with respect to things like the functional ways in which you use it and
Mhm.
how you use it and for
Yeah.
what purpose.
Yeah.
And one of the big questions I love to pose is if I know you're using some sort of AI platform, my question is going to be what was the vetting process for that platform? Why did you
Mhm.
determine that that was what you're going to use? What learning experience do you have in mind to do that? And what are your overall experiential goals?
Mm.
That maps back to AI literacy. Don't
Yeah.
use it just because it's there. And you don't need to learn all the things. You just need to learn the things that are relevant to your context that may allow you to do some of the things that you already want to do more effectively. And then if the efficiency part is factored in, then that's just an ancillary benefit.
Mm.
But I basically
Mhm.
say I will not sacrifice efficacy for efficiency. And again, if you go back to what you shared short time
Mhm.
ago, lesson plan design. So there was that research paper
Mhm.
published on pedagogical bias and lesson plan design. So yeah, I can design a whole semester's worth of lessons. I was
Mhm.
very efficient,
Yeah.
but if you start looking at those lessons, how effective are they? You know what I'm saying? So that's an example of what are the critical thinking skills that I need to have in combination with the functional skills to be able to do that. That to the point you brought up, yeah, maybe I can have it do, let's use the fun thing. In fact, here's an example. I did this with a high school science department. I said, how often you get asked the question by your students, why do I need to learn this? Some of you, I get it often. And I go, well,
Mhm.
if you're not getting, I'm telling you, they're thinking that. Okay. So let's look at it this way. So, one, there is a lack of connection of my lived experience and my relevant context to the standards and the curriculum. So,
Mhm.
number one, you have lesson plans already. Yes? Yes.
Mm.
So, one of the ways that you can leverage artificial intelligence is to have it analyze your lesson plans. But now I'm going to ask you some questions. Tell me about your learners. So, I want to know what do they like? What are their hobbies? What are their dreams? What are their passions? Okay. Those are things that you need to know. What are the opportunities or areas of growth that you recognize in your learners if you were to apply a differentiated lens to it? How is your instruction culturally responsive? Like you see, I'm asking all these design questions because ultimately the answer to those questions is going to be part of the functional skills, i.e., the prompt that I'm going to put in, where I put in my lesson plan and I
Mhm.
tell it, I want to redesign this lesson based on the context of the learners in the room.
Mhm.
I want to have a correlation between relevant and meaningful context that's accessible to them and
Mhm.
the standards. And I said also what we did was I want to introduce each lesson with an interesting hook that supports the learners
Nice.
directly connecting the standard to their lived experience.
Wow.
You see, so I am doing something that is quote unquote more efficient, but it's also highly, highly more effective. But it starts off with centering the humans in the loop. Who's in the room? What do you know about them? What do you need to know about them?
Mhm.
And what do you want? What connection do you want to be able to draw? And in some cases, you might actually have those answers yourself.
Mhm.
And then, yes, if you include AI in that, that's fine. But it's getting that human, essentially that human inventory first.
Oh my gosh. That process alone is so just knowing how to rethink that interaction within
Correct.
prompting and co-working,
Correct.
with the AI is a different shift of what I've been hearing, of how to even use it and how to work with it.
But that's where, again, that's where my approach is not the easy button.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's because the thing I always say is, how do you make sure that your learning and your growth is sustainable?
And I think what you're also saying is this: in order to teach AI literacy, you have to, in yourself, have a strong understanding of AI literacy and then do AI literacy.
Correct.
Keep it going, keep it sharpening, figure out what is your real intention of use and being acutely aware of
Correct.
what's happening in that relationship or just that understanding. That's so rich. I think of I worked for a long time at a professional development institute for teachers and educational leaders. And one of the core values in that institute was the professional development that is happening in that space has to model the learning. I've heard this, and I'm wondering if you've heard this of with teachers of, yeah, this sounds great. I'd love to put this thought or really think intentionally about the AI use, but my administration is mandating that we integrate it or this particular tool that we're using, and I'm not involved in those meetings. It's a closed door, top down mandate that's happening. And I'm curious, like, what do you do to coach, support educational leaders in shifting a mindset or opening up?
And it's the
Yeah.
organizational top-down decision making.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, decisions are made that are multiple degrees removed from the classroom, that whoever makes those decisions or the
Mhm.
impact of those decisions is not, they're not proximal to them. So therefore, in the end, the teachers and then the students become the, when you're not the arbiter of what you have access to and how you use it, you become the
Yeah.
consequence of
You
it.
do?
And again, let's go back to what we brought up earlier.
Mhm.
That's definitely one of the ways that you can compromise at least a degree of what I would say a teacher's investment as well as their enthusiasm for what they do. It's a
Mhm.
very quick way to strip that. But, I think there has to be a degree of accountability on decision makers first. And so,
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. When I've done work with superintendents with respect to artificial intelligence, my first question to them is usually, do you think you need to know how to implement a chatbot in the third grade classroom?
Yeah.
And of course, the answer should be no, you don't.
Yeah.
That's why you hire third grade teachers. What you do want to do is develop a comprehensive awareness around how do AI systems work? What is in our strategic plan or profile of a learner or profile of a graduate or whatever documentation, policy, or
Mhm.
delineation you have of what a learning journey looks like in the district that you lead? And now, what are some of your enduring as well as your anticipatory challenges of that? And then now, how might an AI platform be
Yeah.
part of the solution? And based upon that, what type of questions should you be asking as far as the design of the platforms, the
Mhm.
performance of the platforms, and the accountability of those two things? And
Mhm.
then, based upon all of that, you can make an informed decision on where you will allocate financial resources. So you're getting a 360 perspective on the decision you make and then the impact based upon whatever platform you acquire. But that's a way to make sure it's sustainable. Otherwise, it runs the risk of, you think about during COVID, how many school districts acquired platforms that when they started to analyze how those platforms were being
Yeah.
used, it was either with a low volume of frequency or a low degree of efficacy. And
Mhm.
so that's precisely why I always say that, when it comes to acquiring any sort of technology, first and foremost is, what is the problem that you're looking to solve? And how do you know it's a problem? Who have you
Yeah.
talked to?
Yeah.
So that's precisely how I at least support or encourage leaders to make those decisions. But in the end, going back to what you shared, what mechanisms are in place for an educator or a learner to push back and say, this system doesn't work for me?
Mhm. Yeah.
That needs to occur in AI because I did a workshop for First Nations educators not too long ago, and I share this in my talks. And so when I have the opportunity to work with Indigenous peoples, I always
Mhm.
ask two questions. The first question I always ask is, especially if it's a tribal elder, I always say, because I'm in proximity to you, what's something I can learn about you, your culture, your language, and your people that I won't find in the textbook? And
Mm.
then the second question is, what would you teach me that you all have clearly gotten right as
Yeah.
to your existence on these lands for more than 1,000 years, for thousands of years?
Mhm.
And in that context, there's a couple of things. One through line I've noticed over the years is community approach to wellness, community approach to learning,
Mhm.
approach to essentially support. So
Mhm.
that's one. So communal. The
Mhm.
second one, as it pertains to things like artificial intelligence and quite frankly even technology, because in the end AI is another technology,
Yes.
is the intentionality around the systems oftentimes are not designed with our most vulnerable, under-resourced, under-supported, and marginalized communities. So therefore, they
Mhm.
are left out of too many elements to it. And that's precisely why we have to be in a position to say, okay, if I'm vetting this platform, how might it support the learners that I'm responsible for? And how might it cause harm? And if it does cause harm, are there
Mhm.
mechanisms for leaders to learn what that harm is and either be able to hold the developers accountable or be able to make decisions that mitigate and ideally eliminate the harm that could potentially exist.
There's so many ethical questions that I hear raised. And one of them that is the loudest with using this tech is cheating.
Yeah, the academic integrity questions. Yeah.
It always raises because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, we can. It's almost as if it distracts from the really juicy questions that you just laid before us of, hey, let's slow down. And what do we need to hold tech developers accountable? And what do we need to do, within this space? And then it's like cheating. And let's talk about this. Do you feel like it has distractive narrative within that or something? It's so loud in my space.
This is where I had trouble the narrative and put die in the water.
Yeah.
Okay. So number one, the conversations about academic integrity need to occur, but my assertion is that the use of the terms cheating and plagiarism are a ruse. And I'll share with you a couple of reasons why. So number one, oftentimes in my workshops, I ask educators to define cheating and make it understandable to a fifth grade level. Like if you have to explain it and it's too complex or too difficult, then is it fair to levy that accusation or apply that label? So let's say you have two students in the exact same school district. Student A has adult caregivers that are college educated and they are well resourced financially. They recognize that the child that they care for needs additional supports in, let's say, their math and their science class. So they hire a tutor to come into the home and work with the child they care for their science and their math. Student B in the same school district has two adult caregivers that may or may not be college educated, that work multiple jobs, don't have the financial resources to hire a tutor, but they heard about this thing called artificial intelligence, and they think that that might help augment what the child they care for is learning because they can't afford a tutor. Why is one of those situations deemed acceptable, but the other one is often labeled as cheating?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so that's number one. Number two is educators in general, and I'm seeing a lot more of what I call intellectual or academic gatekeeping occur more in higher ed than K-12, but to the point you just brought up. How have you examined your own pedagogical practices and your assessment design? And do you consider the fact that maybe it is that AI has exposed your antiquated practices that lead students to make conscious choices to engage in actions that, while you choose to call it cheating, I choose to call it compromise your learning? There's an ethical conversation to have there, yes. But I just saw recently where there was a Wall Street Journal article published of where a lot of professors in higher ed are going back to blue books because they're concerned about, quote unquote, students cheating with AI. And so I wrote about it and I said, okay, so number one, what you're saying is cheating didn't occur with blue books. It's now occurring with AI. So now we're going to go back to blue books. I can use myself as an example for that of where I circumvented my learning in an environment in college with blue books. And I go, now, before you say to me, well, Ken, you cheated, let me explain to you the circumstances of that situation. The quarter is 11 weeks. I had class 3 times a week. The professor made my grade 40% of my grade as a midterm and 60% as the final. There was never any check for learning. There was never any check for understanding. There was never any feedback on my growth through the course of those 11 weeks. It was simply high stakes timed assessments, 40% midterm, 60% final. So if you're going to distill 11 weeks of learning to those 2 instances with no feedback, no check for understanding, no opportunities to identify where the gaps might exist, then I'm going to do what's necessary because in the end, the grade matters. Whether you like it or not, you have prioritized the product, not the process. So I'm going to do that.
Oh, I know.
Period.
I see it in my classes with my college students where about midterm season, my students start to drop off in terms of not coming to my class. And that, I'll send check-in emails of, hey, what's going on? I know you. And I know their hobbies, their dreams. We've fostered strong relationship. I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, Dr. Lester, this is my favorite class. I love your class. Please, please, please don't take anything. But I am studying constantly for my other classes and they come in like haggard and tired and worn down and stressed, and yet their attention is so pulled to these high stakes spaces. And I don't know how to sit with it, because I don't know how to hold them with it, where I want to create the space of, no, keep coming here, but then at the same time, what my learning environment reflects is not what's happening external all the time.
Okay, so for the audience, the Wall Street Journal published an article. Hold on, I'll tell you the title of it. They were every student's worst nightmare. Now blue books are back. Cheating with ChatGPT has become a huge problem for colleges. The solution is painfully old school. That's the subtitle. So it's the Wall Street Journal. It's in their business section, Science of Success. And so that was the article. Okay. So read the article. I wrote in response to this. Here's another example that highlights why I discuss cheating in terms of symptoms versus disease and the power dynamics present in a classroom. Instead of examining outdated and ineffective teaching practices that emphasize compliance and control, leading to issues like quote unquote cheating and hindered learning, we often see a reinforcement of that control. However, a truly motivated and innovative student will always find a way to work around these systems. And the three conditions I list, the provocations, are the following. The problem isn't really AI cheating, but actually the use of quote unquote traditional assessments. Why do we continue to measure learning via learners' ability to recall information while accessible tools when that is unrealistic in a professional context? The lack of motivation is due to information lacking relevant context, along with insufficient opportunities to synthesize information into meaningful understanding. The second point, blue books in and of themselves here represent a return to surveillance and control of learning rather than educational innovation. What exactly is being protected, or worse, gatekeeping via positional authority, which is a type of gaslighting, by forcing students to work without readily available resources? And then the third one, instead of adapting now, too many institutions and individuals that work within them are doubling down on educational models and practices that were already outdated at the start of this century. What if the widespread use of AI actually revealed how irrelevant and outdated the assignments and assessments really are? See? But you don't see that. And it is the whole, again, compliance and control, and what I describe as surveillance of learning. Okay, if I know the kids are using Snapchat and I know they have ChatGPT, then at a minimum, what I will build into my instructional program over the course of the quarter of the semester is, here are some things I want you all to do. Number one, use your Snapchats, and you all should form study groups. If you can't get together in person, then use the digital mechanisms that you already communicate with as your virtual get-together. Secondly, I know you use ChatGPT, but I'm going to pose the following thing. So number one, here's a provocation for what I want you to do. If you do this reading, I want you to ask ChatGPT the following things, and I want you to compare what you know versus what it tells you. Are there gaps that are being filled in? Is the information it's giving you accurate? Does it fit within the context of the course that we're doing or the objectives of the course? Here are some things I plan to assess you on. Now I want you to ask ChatGPT that, and I want, or any LLM for that matter, and I want you to look at what do you know versus what are you learning versus what is it telling you. You see, those are things that I would build in, and that goes to what you mentioned earlier. That's an example of both information and media literacy. But I would do that because I understand how these systems work. They prioritize engagement over accuracy. They are designed to give you a response, and it doesn't matter if it's correct. It doesn't matter if it's useful. It doesn't matter if it's practical. So I'm going to build the learning of that so that you don't become over-reliant on AI systems and engage in what I call cognitive offloading. But I do want you to use a readily available resource, but it's still not going to change the purpose of what we're doing. But no matter how you use it, is not going to hinder or compromise your learning. I'm including it in that process. Otherwise, again, that's why I said it's overlooking readily available resources that, by the way, when you get out of the confines of your learning environment and you get into a professional environment, take a guess at what they're going to want you to do. They're going to want you to use all the available resources you have to perform the essential functions of your job.
Can you go back to that gaslighting bit? That caught my ears a little bit when you...
Yes, gaslighting via positional authority.
Ooh.
It happens more often than people realize, especially in education. The whole idea around that is, I hold dominion and control over you, and I can control your grade. So therefore I can tell you what I want you to do. And yes, you might tell me that there is a useful way for AI, but I'm going to ignore and overlook that because in the end, I have control over you, your learning, and your grade. And that's the positional
Mm.
authority. What's really going on is I don't understand AI systems and I'm not going to take the time to learn them. So
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. That's the
Mm.
gaslighting part because you are psychologically manipulating an
Yeah.
audience.
You don't know how to use these texts because we haven't done the work for it, you know?
But in fairness to educators,
Yeah.
or you haven't been provided the professional growth opportunity to understand it.
Yes.
See,
Yeah.
there's a duality there. You might not
Yeah.
have done the work, but my question before, because I don't dunk
Yeah.
on teachers,
Thanks.
before
Yeah.
I hold the
Yeah.
teachers accountable, my question is, what professional growth opportunities have you been provided?
Yeah. Totally. Are you in a supportive environment where you can even
Bingo.
engage with it?
Now let's
Yeah.
go all the way back to what you shared early on.
Yeah.
Demoralization and burnout.
Yeah.
If I'm not seen and heard and not supported, then is it
Yeah.
realistic to expect me to understand these systems? Or is the responsibility solely on me to do that, concurrent with me doing all the other stuff that I have to do?
Mhm.
See how that's what I say, where that's that vicious cycle that can compromise an educator's wellness.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
that's why I wrote the stuff that I wrote in response to
Mhm.
the Wall Street Journal article as well. And so a close friend
Please.
of mine, his brother turned in a paper. He's in grad school. His brother turned in a
Mhm.
paper and he got flagged for violating the school's academic integrity policy because he was accused of using AI to do his work for him. Okay.
Mhm.
And so he reached out to me and was like, I know you talk about this. You've written a book on this. I want to know, how does my brother, what can I help my brother do? And I
Mhm.
said, that's easy. I go, I'm going to tell you in order what I would do if I were your brother, knowing what I know. So the first thing I would do is I would show up at that meeting with the dean and the professor, and I would ask that professor to produce a copy of that piece of paper that you sign acknowledging your knowledge and your consent that they can take your intellectual property that by default you don't give up, by the way, so you got
Mhm.
to know copyright
Mhm.
law, and put it into an AI detector. And I go, that's where it's going to end because I'm sure that they did not produce that piece of paper. And if they
Mhm.
did, was your brother coerced into signing it or could he opt out? Okay.
Mm.
But I know that that's not normalized. So I know that that's where it's going to begin and end. But let's just say your brother's like, you know what? I was still okay with that.
Mhm.
Fine. Then I need you to explain to me two things. One, how do AI detector systems work? And two, what is it doing with my data that you are taking and putting it into that system? Do
Mhm.
you know
Mhm.
that it has bias, especially against non-native English speakers? And when you get the more niche
Mhm.
your learning environment or your content is, it's likely to flag those too.
Interesting.
So if you're going to use a system, then you need to tell me what you're doing, how it works, and what
Mhm.
you're doing to ensure that my data is protected.
Mhm.
And I go, now you can leave it at that,
Mhm.
or you could do what I would do, which I
Mm.
just said, here's something you should know. And I'm sharing
Mhm.
this with you because I want you to have the ethical conversation with your students, not resort to using other mechanisms to try to maintain dominion and control. And I said, so what I said to him was, I said, here's what I would do. I would show up in that meeting and I would take every single thing that professor wrote and I would run that through an AI detector as well. And I'd bring the results of that into that meeting too. See? If you're going to over rely on these systems that, one, I don't consent to you to use, you can't
Mhm.
explain, you don't know how they work, you're compromising my data privacy and protections,
Mhm.
then I'm going to show you exactly how flawed the technology is by using your writing and putting it into that system as well. And what will it flag of
Mm.
yours?
Mm. Whoa.
And of course, the end result, his brother did the first question, and that was where it ended.
And that's where it ended.
I knew it
Mhm.
would. Yes.
Yeah.
That's where it ended.
As I prepare for fall semester, because now I'm shifting gears where I'm starting to look at my curriculum. I teach media literacy, AI literacy, and critical thinking skills, and
Oh, I want to take your classes.
they're a lot of fun. They're really cool. Can we get into just a conversation around AI, how to hold it all through really speaking to college students who are listening right now?
So I spoke at a higher ed event on AI back a couple of months ago.
Mhm.
They did a panel with students
Mm-hmm.
And the moderator asked the students, I would say pretty much all of them were the right questions. The moderator didn't ask this question. I've seen this question asked of students. Why is using AI cheating? The moderator didn't ask him that. And the reason why I'm glad the moderator didn't ask him that, and when I see that question asked, is I'm like, that is a confirmation bias question because you labeled it cheating and now you just want them to validate what you already think. You don't
Mm-hmm.
really want to know what they think. So, for example, I would reframe that question to what would you describe are ethical and unethical uses of artificial intelligence? And can you give an example of where you think it may compromise your learning? That's what type of question, but I've seen it. So at any rate, the common through line I heard from all 5 student panelists and many of the other questions was the students are eager to get guidance on how to use AI ethically and responsibly.
Yeah,
And so, like, if I were
I
in
see that
your
too.
shoes with the class you have coming up this fall, and maybe you can run with this, I would literally pose a question at the very beginning of the semester to the students. I want us to have a discussion. I want you all to share with me and your classmates what are the ways in which you've used AI? Have
Mm-hmm.
you used it in the context of your academic journey? What are the ways you found it useful? What are the ways that you found it not useful? Has it ever revealed information that you've looked at it and has not been correct or has not been helpful? Do you have an awareness of when you use it to help with your ideas and not replace your thinking? What does that look like? Are there ways you envision using AI in this classroom that will help you with your ideas, idea generation, idea expansion, but not replace your thinking? Like I would do those at the beginning. Remember I mentioned culture and ethos? That's something I would put at the very beginning because what you're doing is you're acknowledging that it is a readily available resource
Mm-hmm.
and the students are using it. But what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing is providing framing around, we need to understand what ethical and responsible use is. I'm not going to tell you you can't use it, but we need to examine and interrogate what are the ways in which we can use it that make it
Mm-hmm.
helpful. And again, help with my learning, not replace my thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I work with my students or collaborate on our AI policy and everything that you're doing. I
Brilliant. Brilliant.
weave it in,
Brilliant.
and students are starving for that. Like they want to be involved in how do we think about this and how do we write the policy that's going to go into the syllabus and then into our work.
Again, my default, I don't dunk on educators first. I ask
Yeah.
what sort of professional growth opportunities have you been provided that is
Mm-hmm.
commensurate with ethical and responsible use? To try to discredit, overlook, or ignore that this is a valuable resource that can be used both ethically and responsibly, you're playing whack-a-mole now, and you're gonna lose.
I'm really curious when I read your book, you had an interesting approach to your book where you and your co-author co-created it with AI in some ways, where the cover art was by Dolly, correct? Is that I can't remember or some
Sort
sort
of.
of. Well, you
I can
had
show
it.
that process.
Well, yeah, I love that process because the cover art first AI generated and then further refined by human. The book was a phone conversation that you recorded with your co-author, and then you
Hmm.
put that into ChatGPT, and then worked back and forth with ChatGPT. You even provided transparency of the prompt that you used
Hmm.
and your method throughout, and then you made it apparent and transparent throughout the book too of what you're doing in that space. I thought it was like a really interesting case study that I want to bring to my students too, to be able to see hey, here's an example of how you can do it,
Correct.
where I at least as the reader could still very much hear your voice, which we talk a lot about
Hmm.
within that space of if the conversation is not going to be about cheating, it's going to be about, well, how do we preserve and protect student voice? How do you...
Center the humans in the process. Correct.
Mhm, totally.
Yeah. So the cover art, both Dee and I had an idea, and I would say, I have a master's degree in design, so I could design elements of the cover art. But what we said was, let's see what AI can do. So the cover art process was, what's our initial idea? So we used several different image generators, and we kept iterating and fine-tuning our prompts. And we went through a minimum of a dozen different prompts. And by the way, it still never quite got it right. But we didn't expect it to, because
Yeah.
here's why we did that.
Yeah.
I could tell you, I want you to design a cover that represents the combination of the human element and the technology element, but I want there to be a balance. I want it to include elements that show the promise of the technology, but also the perils of the technology. There also has to be representation that center humans in the loop. And I wanted to take on an Afrofuturism thematic feel to it. That's the description. Now, I could say that, and I would even say you or any of your listeners, what do you visualize? Okay.
Yeah.
Could be a whole bunch of things, right? So we started going through. So in the end, we got it as close to what was kind of what we wanted. And then what we did was we hired a graphic artist and said, okay, here's literally what I described you. Here's what our idea is. This gets you at least some degree of a visual representation of kind of what we're looking at. We hired you for a reason, so now you do you. And then it went through a few more iterations. Then we got one. And then we were like, okay, you know what? This is still not quite what we want. So then we hired a different artist who happens to be a close friend of ours and said, here were the prompts. Here's the slides that show the progression. Here was the human hands now created this. We want you to fine tune it with this descriptive approach. So you see, the humans were centered throughout that whole process. The AI helped us get at least some degree of the visual. Yes, we recorded our conversations because we recognized in the context of our workflow, because we live in different time zones and we both lead busy lives. We were like, okay, so if you're driving or if I'm driving, that's an opportunity for us to record. We already had an outline. The outline we wrote, and so we did it. So then we did speech to text translation, and then we ran it through AI to clean up the grammar. And then we're like, okay, now that the grammar's cleaned up, the next thing is for us to now human hands. And that's why, if you notice, every single chapter begins with a personal story. AI can't write those. And then we went through and made sure that the content of the chapter connected to our personal stories and expanded upon them. Then we hired a copy editor and we said, here's what our process was. Here's the outline. Here's the overarching through lines that we have. Here's the goals that we have. Now we hired you to get another set of human eyes to make sure that it is accessible, it effectively communicates what we want, and it centers our experiences and our perspective on this. So that's where I even ask people, like, so if you know that happened with our book, would you say that we cheated? See?
What's one question you hope we are asking in the future?
How do we maintain humans centered in the entire process? And if we are able to do that, what humans and based on what perspective?
What do you mean by what humans?
Most of us are not represented at the design table, the implementation table, the VC table, who the engineers, and so on and so forth. So that's why I asked what humans, because these systems are built with a set of values. Well, values centered around who based on what. And so that's the whole idea around that. I agree with the statement of we need to maintain humans centered in this loop, but you cannot just say that. It has to be what humans based on what experiences and from what perspectives as well. So there's a duality there.
Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate
Yeah, thank you. Fun
This
conversation.
This has been so fun.